so worried and bothered about our insecurities. We worry that our shortcomings are showing, they are glaring, and everybody is laughing at us. We imagine this thing in our head where we think that our insecurities are greater than what God can do through us in spite of our insecurities. My name is Monica, and today I am particularly excited about my topic. I am so happy to be here with you. Today my topic is why Moses hit the rock instead of speaking to it. You know Moses, that guy, we always talk about him. Moses, the leader of the Israelites. There was a time he disobeyed God, and that cost him something very important. It cost him the promised land. Today, I will be looking at why Moses hit the rock instead of speaking to it. And I'll be looking at the significance of Moses' action and Moses' disobedience to God. You know, sometimes God gives us instructions and we feel that our way, the way that we are used to, the way that has always worked, is better than this new instruction and this new directive that God has for us. So today, I'll be looking at Moses' disobedience and how we do the same thing in our day-to-day lives. My passage for today is Numbers 20 verses 7 to 12. Let us look at this passage together. Grab your Bibles and let us do a good analysis of this topic. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals." So Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them." Okay, that is the passage. God asked Moses to speak to the rock because the children of Israel were thirsty. And you know how the children of Israel behaved. They would cry, they would complain, they would lament, they would wish they could go back to Egypt. The same old things. They were complaining against Moses. And Moses, as usual, went with Aaron to seek God's face. And God said, "Go and speak to the rock." God said, "Take your rod, go with your rod, but go and speak to the rock." So Moses got there and he was upset. He said, "Must we bring out water for you from the rock? Must we give you water? You complain too much." He was upset with the people he was leading, and so he told them that. But what did Moses do next? Moses knew the instruction. The instruction was, speak to the rock. But Moses did not speak to the rock. Instead, he struck the rock 2 times. With his rod, with his stick, with his staff, he hit the rock 2 times. And what happened? Water came forth. Now, when you read that passage and you see that water came forth from the rock, even though Moses did not obey the Lord, you may say to yourself, "Yes, I can do something wrong and get away with it. After all, I still got the desired results." You may get the desired result because God still wants to fix that problem. God's focus was on feeding his children. It was on giving them water. His focus was not about whether Moses will obey him or not at that moment. It wasn't that. It was, my people are thirsty, let me give them water. And so, even though Moses did the wrong thing, God still fixed that problem through Moses' method that went against the instruction of God. And now, having fixed that problem, it is time for God to deal with Moses. It's like, Moses, Aaron, I gave an instruction, an explicit one. I was clear. There was no doubt about what I said. I said, speak to the rock. And you went there and you hit the rock. You didn't even hit it once. You hit it twice for good measure, right? Since you did not believe me, since you did not allow me show my glory through this assignment I gave you, which was speak to the rock, since you did not hallow me through obedience, you did not obey me, you did not hallow me, I will not let you see the promised land. That was Moses' punishment. Now, we are not going to delve deep into what Moses did afterwards and how God ended Moses' life on the mountain. We are going to look at Moses as a person. I am going to kind of psychoanalyze Moses, because when I read the Bible, I find it exciting. I get very excited, and that's why I said I am particularly excited about this passage, because when I was reading it, I was like, whoa, Moses is trauma bond. Moses is still suffering from the trauma. But let's look at Moses' trauma. Now let's go back to when we first met Moses. Not when he was a baby. When Moses was about to become the leader of the children of Israel. What was Moses' complaint when God met him in the burning bush? Moses said, I'm not good at speaking. I stutter. I'm a stammerer. And God said, it's okay. I will give you Aaron. Remember that Moses didn't want to go on the assignment. Do you remember that? We've talked about this before. I will put the link to the video here in the video description so that you can watch that and then come and watch this. Or you can do it vice versa. It doesn't matter. But it's still about Moses. Moses and following God's instruction. When God came to him to say, Moses, I have heard my children cry. I want you to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses complained. Moses said, I don't think I can do this, Lord. I don't think I can. I'm a stammerer. How will I? Me, as I am. How can I go and tell Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go? He will not listen to me. Moses believed that Pharaoh will not listen to him. So when Moses said that to God, God said to him, I will be with you and this will be a sign. But Moses was still not convinced. He said, so who do I tell them sent me? He said, tell them, I am who I am has sent you. He said, I am who I am. Okay. You know, Moses kept putting up oppositions. He kept bringing up excuses, saying, I don't think I'm fit for the job. I don't think I'm qualified. He was indirectly saying, get somebody else. And then he ended up saying, but I don't speak well. And God said, look over there. Your brother Aaron is coming. Let him be your mouthpiece. I will speak to you and you will relay that same thing to Aaron. Aaron will speak on your behalf. And so that was how Moses and Aaron became a duo, with God directing them and telling them what to do along the way. So they were still on the way from Egypt to the promised land. They were still in the wilderness. And many things had happened. At this point, they had eaten manna. At this point, they had eaten quails. And now it was the miracle of water. Where did they get water to drink? Remember that at this point, the Red Sea had parted. At this point, they had seen the Egyptians drown in the Red Sea. And yet, Moses' insecurity had not been cured. Moses was not cured. Moses still had that insecurity, even though he seemed to hide it well behind delegating Aaron to speak on his behalf. Moses still had that insecurity. In spite of the fact that he was delegating, he still had his insecurity. He never quite dealt with it, because he didn't get cured of his stuttering. He didn't get cured of his stammering. He was still who he was at his core. In spite of the fact that God had used him to work miracles, he was still who he was at his core. He still had that shortcoming. He still had that trauma. He was still worried that he was not good enough. And that is partly why Moses did what he did. He struck the rock. Not even once, not one time. Moses struck it 2 times to make sure that the rock brought forth water. He struck that rock 2 times with his rod. He struck the rock 2 times with his stick. that same stick he had been using. Moses had become so attached to it, and so I strongly believe that Moses felt that the power was in his rod. He felt that his stick was what had the power. Moses at a point must have stopped believing that the source of the power was God. A part of him must have stopped believing that it was God who spoke the word and gave power to his hands, and those hands directed the rod to do what it did. Moses must have forgotten that the source was the word of God. He must have forgotten that God was the source of the power of everything that was happening. And so when God said to him, take your rod, he did not say, use your rod. He said, take it. You go along with it, fine. But when you get there, speak. Speak words. Say something. Speak words. Speak to the rock, and the rock will bring forth water. Moses was still not convinced. He had never spoken to anything before. He didn't speak to Pharaoh. Aaron spoke to Pharaoh. He did not speak to the children of Israel all the time. Aaron did his speaking. And so now, a rock. Of course, he did not expect that he should speak to the rock. He did not expect that. So Moses had leaned so much on his staff, on his stick, that he did not imagine that there was another way through which God could do wonders through him. I can imagine that Moses thought that the rock would not obey him. After all, he thought Pharaoh would not listen to him. He imagined, he anticipated, he envisaged that the children of Israel would not pay him attention. They would definitely not follow him. And by extension, why should the rock obey him? Why should the rock bring forth water? Moses was in his own head. Moses was in his own head. He was not thinking from the mind of God. To say the power is in God. The power is not in the stick. The power is not in my mouth. If God says I should speak, then he will put the power in my mouth. Moses trusted too much in his staff because he had seen what his staff could do. His staff wasn't doing anything. His staff was not extraordinary. It was the power of God that descended on his staff that made it extraordinary. But Moses was not thinking like that. Moses was thinking, this is a super staff. This is a super stick. This staff is the it. It is the be all and end all. This is where the power comes from. And Moses was wrong. Moses was wrong. Another thing that I'm looking at is Moses' state of mind. Remember that before he hit the rock 2 times, he said to the children of Israel, must we bring forth water for you? Must we give you water? That's what he said to them. Must we give you water? So I imagine that Moses was pissed. I imagine that he was upset. I imagine that he was not in a state of equilibrium. He wasn't calm at the moment. He was upset. And when you're upset, what do? You do the wrong things. And apart from the fact that Moses was upset, he was already suffering from anxiety, performance anxiety. All along, Moses' stick had been the performer. It had been the star of the show as far as Moses was concerned. It wasn't Moses. Moses was hiding his inadequacies, his trauma, his fear, his anxiety, his feeling less than was hiding behind his stick. And so now, it was as if Moses was suddenly put in the spotlight. It was as if Moses was suddenly put in front of everybody. It was as if Moses was not the leader all along. The stick was the leader, as far as Moses thought in his mind. And so now God says, speak to the rock. Moses is like, speak? Are we back to this speak thing again? This speak thing again? This speech? I have speech impediment. Lord, did you forget? I told you at the burning bush. I told you before we started this journey. Oh, speak? Ooh, Lord, you are about to embarrass me. Lord, you are about to shame me in front of these people and I'm angry at them at the moment. Lord, I am so anxious, I don't want to do this. That must have been what Moses thought. And instead of obeying, what did he do? He did what he always did. He used the stick. What he always did, same old method, same old, Moses did what he did. Same old, Moses did the same thing he had always done. He used the rod. He hid his shame. He hid his fear. He hid his speech impediment behind the stick. And he did what he wanted to do and not what God asked him to do. Moses, who was supposed to be the poster child of obedience. Because you cannot tell people to obey God. You even gave them the 10 commandments. You brought down the 10 commandments and gave these people. And yet you are disobeying God. Look at you, Moses. Not such an exemplary leader, right? It was because of his trauma. It was because of his fear. It was because of his inadequacies. Because of his fear and inadequacies, Moses disobeyed God. And God said to him, "You have disobeyed me. You will not go into the promised land." I can imagine how Moses must have felt. When God told him he would not go to the promised land. It would just be like somebody that is told, yes, you will write all the exams, you will get to final year, but you will never get a certificate. You will never get a degree. You may complete the course, but you will never get a degree from this institution. Moses must have felt bad, really bad. I can imagine. So imagine how Moses felt when God said, "You won't go to the promised land. You won't cross over. Since you did not obey me, you did not allow me show myself strong, show myself mighty in front of these complaining people. These people who keep complaining and keep grumbling. You just did what you wanted to do." Another thing that Moses did not allow God do, because he disobeyed, was he did not let God show that even through his impediments, even through his shortcomings, God can work wonders. Moses did not allow that happen. He did not allow God demonstrate his power and his love, that even though Moses had a shortcoming, God could use that same shortcoming for his glory. God could do wonders through that same shortcoming. Moses didn't let that happen. And so God was upset. And that cost him the promised land. Moses would have felt very fulfilled and accomplished if he had crossed over the promised land. It would have been like the highlight of his life. It would have been awesome going all the way from Egypt and stopping at places that the cloud showed them to stop, and then continuing, then fighting battles along the way, then finally getting to the promised land. It would have been the climax. It would have been the apex. It would have been the zenith of Moses' life. But it became so anticlimactic. It became so unfulfilling that Moses could not even cross over to the promised land because of disobedience. So many times, just like Moses, we are so carried away, we are so consumed, we are so worried and bothered about our insecurities. We worry that our shortcomings are showing, they are glaring, and everybody is laughing at us. We imagine this thing in our head where we think that our insecurities are greater than what God can do through us in spite of our insecurities. But God can work wonders, and God was trying to prove, even through Moses, that through that insecurity, God could do something phenomenal. God could do something extraordinary. A rock could bring forth water just by Moses' speech. Even if Moses had stuttered and said, "Rock, bring forth water," the rock would have obeyed. It wasn't about how Moses was going to say it. It was not about how Moses was going to present it. Moses didn't need to say anything elaborate. He simply needed to obey. That is why the Bible says, trust and obey. Trust God. Believe completely that what God says he will do. And if he says you're the vessel he will use, believe that in spite of your shortcomings, he will still use you. Even with your shortcomings as his tool, he can use you. Believe it and trust in that. Stop thinking so highly about your insecurities. Stop worrying so much about your problems and your shortcomings that you fail to see that God is working a wonder in your life. Stop being so carried away by your inadequacies that you think they are more important in the grand scheme of things. Stop thinking that your insecurities make up the bulk of your life. No, your insecurities are a small, a minute, a tiny part of who you are as a human being. It is just that sometimes we only see our impediments. We only see our shortcomings. We only see where we are failing. We only see our disappointments and our failures. We never get to see just how much God has done through us, for the world to see. We see our problems so much. It is like it is just blocking us like this, like that is all we see. It's like that is all that is before us all the time, and that is all that we think about. But that is not all that we are. You are much more than your insecurities. Let me say it again because I'm serious about this. You are what more than your insecurities. You are more than your failures. You are more than your impediments. You are more than your shortcomings. You can do more in spite of all the things that you find that you think are wrong with you. In spite of everything you think is wrong with you, you can do so much more. And God can use you to do so much. And so when you're walking with God, when you're living your day-to-day life, stop focusing on your shortcomings. In spite of everything, in spite of how Moses had done wonders, in spite of all he had seen, all he had experienced, all God had used him to do, he was still bugged, worried, overcome, bothered by his insecurities. And that was why Moses made the biggest mistake of his life. He disobeyed God and he lost out. He couldn't even cross into that place he had spoken so much about. He couldn't even see that promise that God had given him to deliver. He was like a mailman. He got to the doorway and couldn't even deliver the parcel. That was who Moses was. A mailman who could not deliver. And so Moses had to hand over the baton to Joshua. Joshua became the person who took the children of Israel to the promised land. It's like saying Moses did all the hard work and Joshua just did a little bit and then crossed over. What was the difference? Joshua, Moses, what was the difference? Obedience. The Bible says that Joshua and Caleb obeyed God completely. The word completely. That's the most important part. Completely, totally, without reservations. That was how they obeyed God, to the letter. That was the difference. That was just the difference. Moses obeyed God partially. To a large extent, he obeyed God. But in one thing that Moses thought was inconsequential, he messed up everything. His 99% fell to the ground. He couldn't accomplish. He couldn't deliver because he disobeyed God in what he considered as one little thing. Moses was overwhelmed with his insecurity. He placed his insecurity higher than he placed God. And it's supposed to be the reverse. God should be higher than whatever you think is your insecurity. Whatever you think your shortcoming is, it's not as big, as important, as powerful as God. Stop glorifying your insecurities because that's what you do. If you think about your insecurities every day, if it worries you, if all you can think about is, oh, I'm not good enough, oh, I can't do this, oh, I can't do that, it means that you are downplaying, downgrading, overlooking, ignoring, and actually insulting all the good things that God has stored in you. It means that you are thinking that your bad sides outweigh your good sides. Nobody is perfect, But trust me when I say, if there was a pie chart, the good side of you will be the bigger part of the pie. Your insecurities will be that small blip. That small blip that shows you're human. It doesn't change the fact that a huge part of you does wonders. It doesn't change the fact that a bulk of who you are is awesome, is wonderful, and can do great things. So stop looking at that tiny thing, that blip, that dot, that small insignificant failure, that small insignificant insecurity, that impediment, that shortcoming, that thing you don't have. Stop making it so big. It's not that big. It's not that big, I'm telling you. It's not as important as you're making it look. It is far less important than your great side, your awesome side that God can use. And the irony is that even that useless thing, even that thing you're writing off, God can use. After all, God knew that Moses was a stutterer. He made him, of course. Plus, Moses had reminded him in the burning bush. We did not read that Moses' stuttering was cured. It never was. Moses died with that stuttering. He had it till his final days. He wasn't cured. And yet God said, speak to the rock. Moses had never told God all the time he was going to whether it was the tabernacle of meeting or going to the mountain. He never told God, cure my impediments. He didn't. And God didn't want to, I guess. God didn't do that. God never cured his impediments. But in spite of the fact that Moses still had that impediment, God knowing, all-knowing God said, go and speak to the rock. And then Moses was like, this speech thing again. Are we back here? I told you I don't want to use this voice. Moses wanted to use only the tools that were convenient for him. He wanted to use the tools that hid and shielded his insecurities. Moses was so aware of his insecurities in spite of the wonders he was doing. And so he made his stick a kind of God. He made the stick the center of his performance. He made the stick the chief performer in the miracles that he worked on the way to the promised land. God didn't want that. Moses kind of enthroned his stick. I don't know if you realize that. He kind of made his stick a kind of God. Did he even know that? I doubt he did. Because if you think that is only the stick that God can use, if you think that is only Aaron, your brother, that can speak on your behalf, and that your own voice should never be heard, even when God has said speak, you're mistaken. You are mistaken. And so today I am reminding us, do not make the mistake that Moses made. That mistake that cost him everything. That mistake that made his life end on an anticlimactic note. That mistake that made him not cross over to the promised land. The mistake of disobedience. It's not just regular, everyday disobedience like I won't do it. It's like I can't do it. I won't do it means you know you can do it. You trust you can do it. You just don't want to do it. Then I can't do it is that you are doubting your abilities. But there's no difference between the two. In terms of consequences, there is no difference. God is still going to deal with you appropriately in spite of which you go for. Moses' disobedience was the I can't do it. But God knew that Moses could not speak well. But God also knew that the quality of his speech did not affect the miracle that God was going to work through his speaking. And so Moses should have still spoken anyhow he could. Moses should have still obeyed God, even though it was not convenient for him. Moses should have still shown that in spite of his impediments, in spite of his shortcomings, God could still work wonders through his shortcomings. But he failed to give God that glory. He failed to give God that honor. And so I'm saying to you today, what is it that you feel you cannot do? What is that shortcoming that you feel is not an avenue through which God can receive glory? What is that thing in you that you feel is useless to God? God can use it, irrespective of what you think. If God says, use this thing that is not 100% perfect to honor me, use it. If you cannot sing and God says, sing to me, He says, sing to me with cymbals, with harps, with lutes. Sing as you can. With your croaky, so-called croaky voice, sing to God. If God says, get up and speak to the nations, and you have this fear of speaking, public speaking terrifies you, it doesn't matter. God said do it. He will take care of the process. If God says you should do it, it means He will provide the resources. It means that He will open the ears of the people to listen to you, irrespective of how you speak. If God says, go around the world and do my wonders, and you're somebody who hates traveling, you hate flying, you hate even taking drives, my dear, get up and go. Get up and go. Don't say to yourself, but there are people here in my town that need to hear me. People in my neighborhood can hear me. Let me go and speak to my neighborhood. At least I've obeyed God. You are obeying God partially. Let me remind you. And that is why Moses failed, because he obeyed God to some extent. Because he obeyed God to the extent that he felt comfortable. Don't make that same mistake. If God says, go around the world, go around the world. He will take care of your fear of flights. He will find a way. He will make a way. He's the God who makes a way where there seems to be no way. Your own part is to trust. Do your part, your role, your obligation. Your part of the covenant is to obey. God will take care of every other thing. Obey God and He will take care of every other thing. Your shortcomings, your limitations, your fears, your worries, everything God will take care of. I don't want to make this message too lengthy because, like I said, this message was one that I was really passionate about when I was reading, and I said, I can't keep it to myself. Let me come and share. I said, let me come and share. I can't keep this to myself. So here I am with the message. But I don't want to make it a 1 hour thing or a 2 hour thing, even though I could go on and on and on this topic. The topic is obedience. Obedience. Obey God when it is not favorable. Obey God when you would rather hide. Obey God when you would rather do something else. Obey Him completely. The word is completely. Obey God completely. Don't obey Him to the extent to which you are comfortable. Obey God even when you are uncomfortable. I hope this message has blessed you, and I hope it has had you reassessing to what extent to which you obey God. And now you have made up your mind to obey God to the letter. I hope this message has blessed you. If this message has blessed you, please drop your comments below. I would love to read from you. Please drop me a comment or two. Keep commenting, keep telling me how this message has blessed you and positively impacted you. Also, if you enjoyed watching this video, please subscribe to this channel. It is completely free of charge. You don't have to pay even a dime. Please subscribe to this channel. Click the subscribe button and get subscribed to this channel today. Also, do not forget to click the notification button so you'll be notified as soon as I update. Please like and share my videos. I enjoyed bringing this video to you, like I have said over and over again, and I hope you enjoyed watching it and you learned a thing or two. Wherever you are, whatever you do, let your light so shine. I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Please subscribe, click the notification button, like this channel, share our videos, and follow us on social media. Thank you very much.